Hey, everybody. We're diving into the world of AI and Gen AI today with a true expert and innovator in the field at CEI. Jeff, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, Evan? Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. Last few days of August, dog days of August. Nice to chat with you at this time before the busy September tech season starts up again. Maybe introductions wise, who is CEI and describe a little bit about your role and mission?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is, as you said, is Jeff Tewksbury. I am our AI innovation lead and principal architect at CEI. So, who is CEI? CEI is a software consulting company. We're headquartered out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've been around for about 30 years. We do a work in a lot of different spaces. So, we work in app modernization overall. That could include web applications, mobile applications, integration platforms. We do a lot of work in the DevOps space, so we're GitHub advanced partners in that space as well, helping customers to understand how to operate and deploy solutions at scale. We do a lot of work in big data and analytics as well. So we do a lot of work there in Azure and AWS and GCP, platforms like Snowflake, Databricks, and others. And we also have teams that help us in support of things like QA, project management, human-centered design, things like that. So all around, we're focused on application development, infrastructure hosting, doing a lot of work with the major hyperscalers like AWS and Azure and GCP.
Yeah, an interesting, you do onshore development, nearshore, offshore, really interesting model. But let's dive into integrating AI into various service offerings. What's the big idea, and how do you think about that when it comes to, I don't know, managed services, enterprise platforms, all the different use cases you have?
Yeah, we really see AI as an assistant, and I think that's one of the first things that we want to talk about when we think about where AI is incorporated into the organization. So, as an example, back in 2017, his name is Jeff Hinton. He's a major figure in the AI space. He made a relatively famous statement. He said, "In the future, we won't need radiologists, so don't become a radiologist." And his thought process there was because AI was going to be so able and so finely tuned to be able to look at abnormalities in MRIs and CT scans and things like that, that radiologists would no longer be needed. And that actually is kind of a common concern in the AI space, that when organizations start to introduce AI, it's going to suddenly take over people's jobs and potentially displace people. But the truth of the matter is if you think about that statement was made almost 8 years ago, there's actually more radiologists today than ever. And there's a couple reasons for that. One of the reasons is that the kind of work that they do is actually extremely challenging, and diagnosing those abnormalities is a much harder task than just looking at a single image. There's a lot more involved, and but the more important thing I want to get across is that AI is really good and focused at helping to make people more productive at specific tasks that make up their jobs. So if you think about a radiologist, they gather patient histories, they consult with other doctors, they perform research, they treat complications before and after. So there's a lot more involved, and there's certain tasks in that kind of spectrum that AI is really well suited to support. Maybe gathering patient histories and summarizing and providing some context in terms of that history. But there's other tasks in there that AI really isn't able to assist with. So there's an alternative view from Kurt Laglitz. He's the director at the Center of Artificial Intelligence for Machine Imaging at Stanford. He actually stated that AI will not replace radiologists, but radiologists that leverage AI will vastly outperform those that do not. And that's really how we see
Mm.
it. So we see AI as being an assistant to be able to help you be more productive at specific tasks in your job, to help you be able to move things through things more quickly so you can focus on more strategic areas.
Wow, that's quite a mission. And speaking of Gen AI, and tons of hype, but how do you think about it? As a practical tool in the work you do, and how's that unfolding? Or I'm using it as a small business owner for marketing and all kinds of interesting purposes, but a rather different perspective when you get into a large enterprise or a mission critical financial services or healthcare use case, right?
Yeah, and so really when we think about it, and the reason that we see or feel like there's so much hype around generative AI is because we really see it as the next evolution of how we can work with knowledge, right? How we process and consume knowledge, and also how we can unleash creativity. So that and as an example, when we're thinking about how this could be used in different industries like finance or healthcare or manufacturing, whatever it might be, what we're really looking for are tasks where we are working with knowledge. We really like to go after and target knowledge workers as some initial use cases for these kind of technologies, just because it's so well aligned to that. So, for instance, generative AI is fantastic at taking vast amounts of information and distilling it down into a more consumable fashion. So if you have activities, and we work with clients with these things all the time, where you're working with large amounts of documentation. Take, for instance, finance, right? And let's say you're working through commercial loans and you're having to process not only the stipulations of the loan itself, but also you're having to look at financial records from the individual the loan is for. Maybe you're looking for verification of employment, you're looking at past tax returns, you're looking at all this information. You have to pull and glean different pieces of that information together in order to be able to make a determination, right? Are we going to service this individual's loan? That can be a lot of work for one person to go and first go and discover where did that information reside, and then process and parse through all this information. Generative AI is a great use case for that, to be an assistant with you, to be able to point to all this documentation information that's out there and then pull out that information that's salient specifically to you. So we see it as that knowledge consumption enablement as one of the main areas, but we also see it as a way of unleashing creativity. So I don't know, Evan, if you've been following this, but have you seen some of the videos of things like OpenAI Sora and some of the image creation with Dolly 3 or others that are out there, and kind of the kind of things that you can create with those?
Oh yeah, I'm completely obsessed, as are many of us in tech. Our true inner geeks are being brought out there. So yeah,
Yeah, I
pretty
mean, it's
amazing.
absolutely phenomenal, right? If you look at marketing departments and you think about some of the work that they do in creating flyers and pamphlets and newsletters and even putting together promotional videos and things of that nature, really where I see a lot of the power in generative AI to unleash creativity is the fact that you get to direct this this absolute monster in terms of creativity. You get to tell it, I want you to create a video and I want you to put this here and I want to see this and I want to look realistic and I want these different things to happen throughout the course of that video. It really puts you in a director's seat without having to have the artistic creativity and things like that that one would traditionally need in the past. So it really provides opportunities for you to really embrace new ways of creating content for your end users.
Yeah, and that's super exciting. But I wonder, as you get to, and I hate to call them the boring industries that we all know and love, in manufacturing or financial services, companies that maybe resist change to some degree, healthcare. What are some of the anecdotes or use cases that you're seeing in those areas today with Gen AI?
Yeah, and so it all comes down really to those knowledge workers, and we have to think about, again, the fact that when we look at AI, from our perspective, we really look at it as a way of helping to perform different tasks more quickly. So, for example, we've worked in finance with individuals that have had, we mentioned commercial loan, and maybe I'll build up that a little bit. So we've had individuals that have tasks specific to having to process that loan documentation, or having to
Mm,
look at documentation that would be related to how do we define whether or not the collateral that's being put up for this loan is going to match the requirements that are stipulated by, say, syndicated loan agreements or things of that nature. That kind of work, we love to have examples where we can put an AI assistant right next to that individual so they can
mm,
process things more quickly. And we typically go through kind of an assessment-based process in that. So if you think about, let's say we have a role in an organization that performs 10 tasks. What we like to do is talk to those individuals and do some job shadowing and understand what is it that you're actually doing on a daily basis? How are you actually executing those tasks? And start to identify areas where you could be assisted by something such as generative AI. And when we look at that, you can look at it from a couple of different angles. You can look at it from one, how much time is spent to perform a given task on a regular basis, and how many people do you actually have performing those tasks. We worked with a major finance institution here in Pittsburgh, their commercial loan division, and we noticed that they had over 100 loan administrators that were spending on average about 2.5 to 3 hours locating, researching, and digesting information. If you could actually bring that down by 20%, we discovered that we could actually save millions of dollars to repurpose those individuals to perform more strategic activities if we can give them some assistance to discover that information more quickly. And the same is true across all industries. You just have to find those use cases where, again, you're working with large amounts of information in order to help them to distill that down.
Oh, great approach. You deal with many different clients and different industries. What are some of the challenges that they should consider when going down this path?
Yeah,
What are the barriers and hurdles they have to overcome that you're seeing?
Yeah, so one of the major challenges we see is just charting a course through your organization. A lot of organizations today are just trying to figure out where can we apply this. So like we said, one of the first starting points that we tend to work on is a task-based analysis. We try to figure out, okay, let's help you chart a path. Let's help you prioritize workloads that we think we could start to bring some of this technology to. So like we said, that involves looking at ROI for where we can apply those technologies, but then also looking at what are the available resources we have. So for instance, if you want to provide an AI-based solution, it's only going to be as powerful as the data you can provide it, right? We like to say that data is the octane and the fuel that drives AI. So you want to make sure that you have high octane data to drive that AI. So you also need to think about, this may be a great use case from an ROI perspective, but it's going to take a lot of effort to get the data prepared in order to support it. Or is the scenario where that data is already readily available? And you also have to consider kind of the potential risks that might be associated with potential AI solutions. So what you don't want to do is start off your first AI solution with a high risk, kind of high profile scenario, right? AI responsibility is something that's going to become more and more prevalent and baked into regulations here in the future. The EU Act is now very much in play, and that's going to start to drive a lot of regulation that we're going to see not only here in the US, but around the world. So you need to make sure that you're dealing with things like, for instance, making sure that PII data isn't being unnecessarily exposed to things like large language models when you obviously wouldn't want them to. That you are also dealing with things called hallucinations. If you're up to speed on generative AI, you'll be familiar with the concept that generative AI can sometimes provide answers back which aren't necessarily grounded on reality. They can get somewhat creative in their responses from time to time. So, in terms of the risk, you just want to make sure that you have the tools in place to address those sorts of things. Um, Another scenario is that you need to make sure that you have an environment where you can rapidly experiment. So, really, AI and generative AI solutions is all about exploration right now. It's all about looking at what are the potential solutions and opportunities out there and rapidly experiment to see if those solutions or technologies can bring some productivity to a particular situation. So you kind of start to need to pick some platforms. Some people are very comfortable working in platforms like ChatGPT and using custom GPTs to drive things. Others need more privatized environments, things like AWS Bedrock or even AI Studio and things like that in Azure. So typically what we try to do is help customers to understand what are the different platforms that they're comfortable using that would provide strong capabilities for the use case that they're building to. And once you've kind of experimented and you've kind of, against the use case that have been identified, and then you start to work through experiments that seem to be bearing fruit or seem to have promise, that's when you need to make sure that you start to pilot those with selected users. So you can pilot them so you can start to get feedback and start to get understanding of how those are going to work in the real world. And then once you pilot those, that becomes a time when you need to start thinking about operationalizing them if they start to provide value. And that's where you really need to start layering in the things like AI responsibility. You have to layer in, strong LLM ops approaches. So things like observability into what users are asking your models, what responses they're getting back. There's a lot of tooling out there as well that organizations should become familiar with around evaluation. So you can think of evaluation as unit testing for your generative AI apps, where you're passing it a number of different responses and a number of different prompts and expected responses, and you're kind of testing to make sure that you're getting back what you expect, so you're not dealing with hallucinations and other kind of creativity issues. And then you talked about finance and healthcare, highly regulated organizations. You need to think about how you're going to protect the data that you're going to bring into it. So you may need to think about, if you're working with large corpuses of documents, do you apply things like sensitivity labels to those, so you can make sure that only people who have access or should have access to restricted documents are able to work with AI and for those documents. You need to, now that we have scenarios where people can use these solutions like ChatGPT and others, kind of need to make sure that you have protections in place, like data loss prevention, so that people aren't copying information into some of these platforms and potentially exposing information. And you want to make sure that you can kind of audit the trail of what users have asked and how users are working with what we call these large language models and generative AI solutions, so you can have an audit trail, so that if anyone ever comes back and asks, well, why did you come to a certain solution, you have a trail which you can articulate back to see how particular solutions or why particular decisions were made. And then finally, you have to think about, a lot of organizations have data that's kind of trapped in data silos, right? Like they're trapped in legacy systems, and that kind of excludes it from your organization's broader data civilization, if you will. So you need to think about how, if there is data that's needed in these data silos, you have to kind of think about how you can expose that back to your broader data organization, and so you can leverage it within these AI solutions. So there's a lot of just data sensitivity and data access, and then operational kind of things that you need to consider as you start to move into this arena.
Well, there's a lot there to unpack, which is why I think the Deloittes and McKinseys of the world are doing very well, giving advice and strategic guidance. But for companies who don't have McKinsey on retainer, I mean, how do they go about building a strategy? I mean, maybe like you or I spend all the time in the day playing with new models and tools and trying things out, but not always is there the knowledge or time or willpower to spend 12 hours a day thinking about these sort of things. And there's no like reading list, right?
Yeah.
Book list. What's your thought about coming up with a strategy?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think the first thing is just to identify and start to work with your workforce to understand, how are they spending their days? Where are they spending a lot of their time? Right. And that's something that can easily be done through job shadowing and interviews, and just understanding, the kind of work that your employees are doing. Figure out where their pain points are. Generative AI is not going to solve this. It's not a silver bullet, as we all know. It needs to be used in very strategic kind of areas. And so you need to find those opportunities where you can start to identify, where can you increase someone's productivity based on giving them access to information more quickly. So I would say that would be step one, is just to understand the different activities that your users are performing, and start to think about whether or not generative AI's ability to distill down that information and reason upon that information can help make them more productive. And then the second point, if I have a two-pronged approach there, would be set up that rapid experimentation environment. It could be as simple as standing up GPTs and ChatGPT and uploading documents there very quickly, and you can start to have discussions with your documents within minutes. If you need something that's a little more controlled within your environment, that's where you can look at companies like CEI or others to help you stand up tools like AI Studio in Azure or Bedrock, and that'll give you a similar kind of experimental playground, but just within your private network, if you will. But I would say that those are two of the primary things, because you are going to identify use cases that seem great, but you're going to discover that just because of the way the documentation is formatted, or because of where that documentation is located, that it may not be a great use case without a lot of work to get prepped and ready to go. You may find also use cases that maybe didn't seem as interesting at first, but with some quick experimentation, you can discover that they could really add some value quickly.
Fantastic. Maybe talk a little bit about the internal side at CEI in terms of your team. I mean, how do you think about upskilling your talent and skill sets and hiring so that they're on the leading edge of all these tools and capabilities? Not always easy to do.
Yeah, so one of the things we actually did this summer was we had an internal hackathon. So
Hmm.
at CEI, so we have a number of developers. We have a vast majority are within Pittsburgh, but we have developers all on the East Coast. We have developers Midwest, a number in Florida, Georgia, heading all the way up to Pittsburgh and up in New York. But so what we did was over a weekend we held a hackathon, and a lot of companies are doing this. This is a very common thing to do to start to innovate and get people thinking of ways that AI could help them. The way we approached that was pretty simple. So we had about 20 people come in. We sat down and we identified, and everyone had a chance to kind of pitch an idea. Right, here's something that I think would be beneficial to the organization. Each of those ideas was then kind of discussed, and we broke into teams. And so we had four different teams that we worked on four different projects over the weekend. And again, it wasn't anything where you're creating polished, you know, production solutions by the end. But what we did was some rapid experimentation over the weekend. People were able to showcase their work towards the end of it. And now what we do is we have people who are now carrying on some of those solutions that we built during the hackathon, which is really exciting to see. So we can actually dog food this ourselves. So not to get too specific, but we had a couple of examples that were specifically targeting productivity for project management within CEI and how we schedule individuals and things of that nature. And now working towards production versions of that can become part of the general workflow in the organization. So it's a great way to introduce people to the technologies. We have training material that we put together that we often share with clients. Just how do you use what are the basic constructs, right? Like if you look at something like this, let's say OpenAI, what does it mean to call OpenAI to either get a text completion where you're asking it for information? How do you very simply incorporate your own data into those models? Because again, that's really where the power is, right? If you're just calling a model on its own, it can be fun and interesting, but really the power is when you can provide it with your data and you can actually have it start to reason over top of your data. So, what are some simple ways to do that programmatically, or even just through tools like GPTs and others? You start to think about and understand how do you work with things like chat history, so you can have follow on and recall within your models and your conversations. So we just have some basic training that we put everyone through ahead of the hackathon, and that we've worked with our clients with, and then we just unleash them, and the results were pretty impressive.
Oh, what a great approach. Well, amazing insights. We're on quite a journey. What are you looking forward to as we head into, post Labor Day and the big busy season? What's on your mind personally, professionally?
What's on my mind? Well, obviously, we're always trying to find ways of working with customers on these types of solutions and others. I don't know. On a personal note, my kids are back to school, so that's a load off. So now I get to actually, hopefully focus some more time on some of these things. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious. I'll ask you. Like, what are you looking forward to?
It's great post pandemic meetups and get togethers. And, I do this daily face to face virtual, but it's nice to get together in groups, whether it's a hackathon or a
Yeah,
meetup or big events here. I'm at VMware Explore this week. So, yeah, I think just getting out into the real world and getting my hands dirty. I think you have to be a practitioner in this area. You can't just read Wall Street Journal headlines and figure this stuff out. So,
very
yeah,
true.
having
And
fun, making lots of mistakes. Yeah.
yeah, and it's true. That's actually a good point. I found myself traveling, I think, over the last 6 months more than I had over the last 3 or 4 years. So it is good to see those face-to-face kind of meetings coming back. I'm happy to see it.
Well, good luck with that. And thanks so much for sharing insights and all the opportunities with the audience here. And thanks everyone for listening, watching. look forward to our next chat. Take care, Jeff.
All right. Thank you, Evan.